reason it's oriented stupidly. So we're going to fix that if we can. And that is not what we want. Yeah, all right. Show must go on. And so shall we. I'm having a little bit of issue today with everything. Everything's not working today. So I hope you guys are having a good one. We're going to talk a little bit about dialogue today. I'll see if I can actually get this to have the correct orientation. For whatever reason, it went vertical. I don't know why. I think it's because I'm using my phone, right? So my computer, it's not my computer that's the problem, is just not wanting to keep the devices, the mini devices, still going. There we go. All right. So yeah, my power conditioner is the problem today. It is actually not my I'm sorry for this. I have never used the YouTube phone app to stream in like years at this point, and for whatever reason, it wants me to do it vertically. So I guess we'll do it vertically. We'll do like a narrow angle shot. You can see the guitar in the background or whatever. So we'll do a narrow shot. I mean, maybe I can turn on another light here. No, lighting's not there, but we'll roll with it. No internet. Power conditioner's not working as well. So that's what's going on today for this little stream here. Yes, it's a phone stream today. Today we're doing phone stream edition. Let's get this in a little bit better position. There we go. And we can still wear the hat, right? Now you can see the full like height of this hat when it's in the vertical format. So we'll roll with it like that. Can't see all the cool equipment I've got sitting around. Beautiful Ableton. Over here on the side, you can see my guitar in the back. One of my guitars. All right, so today I want to talk about dialogue. Okay, dialogue is something that exists pretty much in every story format that I can think of. You do not have to have dialogue to have a complete story. Like there are H.P. Lovecraft stories that maybe have no dialogue, right? You actually can write a story or an epic poem without dialogue, but most of them are going to include dialogue. If you're doing something like a movie, you're probably going to need dialogue. You can do a movie without dialogue, right? It's a visual medium. As long as you have those visuals, then you can make a movie without dialogue. Most people, when they write a script, they're not writing like a series of descriptions of scenes they're going to shoot. If someone were going to make a movie without dialogue, they would probably just make some sort of setup for doing that, for like shooting it and then go. They wouldn't write a script for it. But you're going to write a script for most movies. You're going to write a script for most comics. Most comics are going to have dialogue bubbles as well as like narration boxes and things like that. We're just going to talk about dialogue, like the words that come out of people's mouths that are in a language, right? Here's a couple tips for writing dialogue. Like, hey, if I was on my computer, I'd have a whole thing. I'd show you some of the things about like prose tags and things like that. It's not going to happen tonight, but that is okay. We will, we'll just roll with it. When you're writing dialogue, the tendency for new writers is to write dialogue that is like the things which they say, like the things that you actually say, right? This is actually not a very good way to write dialogue, and it usually will end up coming across poorly, and it'll take up too much space. When you stop and think about how you talk, you insert a lot of ums and ahs, right? You have those little ums, ahs, those things that fill up the space because we don't like to hear silence. You wouldn't write those in a script unless you wanted a character to actually like stumble over his words. But you might also just say he stumbled over his words rather than writing Sometimes you see it in dialogue, right? You can have Harry Potter goes, I don't know what you say, right? So you can have an or something like that, just to show that the character is stammering or he's stalling, things like that. But most dialogue, you're not going to put those amounts of details in. Rather, you're going to put in the actual words as they would mean, as the character would mean to say them. You wouldn't have stuttering. Like sometimes I stutter when I talk. Everybody does it. You get tripped up a little bit right. You wouldn't write that unless the character actually was doing that in a way that was significant to the story. The little hiccups that we have when we talk, you're not going to put that in. What you are going to put in is sort of the best of. And one of the things that's important to realize about dialogue is that dialogue needs to serve the story just like anything else in the story. So if you are writing dialogue that is just conversational, right? Two people sitting down and having a conversation. A lot of times that's inappropriate for most stories. If you're sitting down and having a conversation with a friend, you can talk for like 45 minutes. 45 minutes of dialogue is 45 pages of a script, right? You're not going to have a 45-minute long dialogue, but you want to show two friends having a conversation. So you need to select the best of. You need to select the things that you would say which are really going to matter to the reader and to the listener and to the way that the story is going to play out. So what does that mean, right? Well, let's say two friends are going to go fishing. And what's the purpose of them having the dialogue when they're fishing? Well, something needs to advance in the story, right? We need to learn something about the characters or advance the plot. So maybe they go fishing and they see a shiny gold ring in the water, right? Or maybe they go fishing and like Bert says to Bob, you know, uh, Jill down at the office, I think she has a thing for you. Maybe you should ask her out. Oh, what, me? No, she's way out of my league. So we're doing some characterization when we have that kind of dialogue. That's all you would show is you would show them having the conversation that matters to the plot and maybe having one or two other things for color. Like maybe he tells like a one-liner joke. Maybe there's a little bit of banter. Um, it's like, yeah, Jill's down at the office. She likes you. Like, what, me? She's way out of my league. Yeah, I know. Trust me, no one knows that she's out of your league more than I do, bro, but she likes you. So you should ask her out, right? So there's some, and then we're going to move the plot forward. Maybe it's a romantic comedy or something else like that. And, we need to have that dialogue in order to set up the next thing that's going to happen. You wouldn't have 30 minutes of two friends like talking about fishing, right? Or talking about golf. Brian Regan had this bit. Oh yeah, you went golfing with, Bob or whatever, right? How's he doing? I think he's doing okay. It's like my friend had just gotten divorced. Is he dating anybody? I don't know. How would I know that? You went golfing for 4 hours and you don't know if he's dating anybody? I know he has a new driver. you know, how would I know if he's dating anybody? I can't believe that you went golfing and you don't know if he's dating anybody. Well, how would I bring that up? Yeah, looks like I could see your ball out there about past the 200 yard marker. Are you dating anybody? Right. But when we're writing a book, like it's a funny joke because in our real life we don't just volunteer important details for the plot of our lives. We have conversations that are relevant to the moment that we're having them. But when we're writing a book, we actually have to think like, okay, they're going golfing so that Bob can reveal that he has a new girlfriend. And then he's like, well, what's the problem with the girlfriend? Maybe there's a problem with the girlfriend. The problem with the girlfriend. She's a witch. Like a real witch. Right? So that boom, we're going to reveal some things about the plot with the dialogue. So dialogue needs to serve the story just like any other element that's there. One of the easy things to, I guess, imitate poorly is, say, Kevin Smith dialogue. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Kevin Smith dialogue, but one of the things that people like about Kevin Smith dialogue is that it feels very real. It feels very natural. Like those are really the characters and they're really having a real conversation. When you stop and look at it, it's really not. It's very artificial because it's a story. Everything that they're talking about is relevant to the story. It's relevant to them as characters or it's relevant to something in the plot specifically. Even the stuff about, like, if you're watching Chasing Amy, it's like you're a tracer because he's the guy who inks the comic and the other guy does the pencils, right? It's like, oh, you're a tracer, right? um, that joke is there partly to make you laugh, but also to show that character who's doing the inking may have like an inferiority complex because other people aren't recognizing his contribution to the product. It's actually pretty pretty important to think about stuff like that. Okay, so when we're writing dialogue, it's really about less is more. I hate saying less is more. Like, I'm reminded of Ingve Malmsteen. It's like, he was recording or something, and like someone's like, let's do it again, but remember, less is more. And he goes, I just got here from Sweden, I didn't understand this expression. He's like, what do you mean less is more? How can less be more? Less cannot be more. Only more is more. He wanted him to play fewer notes, right? He's like, but he didn't put it that way. He's like, remember, less is more. It's like, less cannot be more, right? But when we're writing dialogue, you want to keep it limited. Just like anything else, you can actually bore the reader with dialogue. If people are having too much banter and the banter doesn't seem like it's moving anything forward in the story, yes, the reader can get bored. And in fact, this is some of the things that I didn't like about some of the books after, say, Way of Kings in the Stormlight Archive. There are many scenes where the characters are talking to each other because they need, these two characters need to be having an interaction to like begin a romantic subplot, but they're just talking about nothing, right? They're not talking about things that are really relevant to the story. Like, there's a part where they're talking about like, how do you poop in your armor, and it's like, this is so silly, right? It just sticks out, it sticks out, and it's kind of boring, right? It doesn't serve anything. So you're like, why can't you just mention that somewhere else, or just not mention it, and have these characters have a meaningful conversation, like about the plot or something that is, I don't know, meaningful, right? Like, pooping in armor has no real meaning. Can't have a conversation about God or something like that. Anyway, so it's someone might complain about a lot of books. Robert Jordan, actually, Brandon Sanderson finished Robert Jordan, so um, Robert Jordan would have a lot of these conversations where nobody's really talking about anything. Nothing's moving forward. They're talking about the universe. They're talking about things you already know. They're not talking about things that matter. So when you are choosing what to put in your dialogue, cut it down to what is really going to be relevant. When you can actually learn a lot about writing dialogue from writing scripts. Like, if you want to try writing a movie script sometime, you have to keep in mind that movies run on a much tighter format than novels. Like, I can write, my next novel will probably be 150,000 words long, right? Um, so that's really long. That's pretty long. It might be even longer than that. So that's a pretty thick book. I can't write a movie script that's 300 pages long. That's a 300-minute movie, right? You're going to have to usually write a smaller movie than that. And in fact, to get a movie picked up, it's usually going to have to be an even tighter format depending on the genre. Like, a romantic comedy, for instance, really needs to be 105 pages. So you have this really limited amount of time to tell the story, and you have to be really efficient when you're writing a movie script. So choosing what not to put in dialogue is just as important as choosing what's going to go into the dialogue. And if you're editing and revising, and you're revising for length, which you often have to do with movie scripts, it's a good idea to look at what dialogue you can cut out. What dialogue is not moving things forward? Or can I take half a page and make it 2 lines? Can I take a full page and make it half a page? Can I cut out some of the interlocution? Like, can I cut out some of the amount of people talking to each other? Can we do that? So that's what's important about dialogue. don't tell them don't tell them less don't let them tell you less is more. More is more. Director of The Mummy and Deep Rising. Yeah. um, so for me to check the chat, I have to kind of scroll it below my face, which is interesting. So bro, what are you wearing? It's my waxed leather wizard hat. uh, so sorry for the late start. Yeah, I'll figure out the technical problems later. Luckily, I have backup for even when my power conditioner is not working. Whoa! I knocked my down. I knocked it down. He whispered. Talk about attacks in a minute. Trying to get that light like moved over to the right angle. I have like all of these 1/4-inch cables just like crisscrossing my desk, and I'm like trying to get this little camera claw to not wobble over all of the ridiculous amount of equipment. I'm going to learn from this experience. Got to keep a cleaner desk. And I'm going to be really upset if I have to buy a new power conditioner because these aren't freaking cheap. But I don't feel super secure plugging a lot of equipment into just a regular power strip. I might have to, I don't know. I'll look it up. If I have to get another power conditioner, it keeps thinking there's too much extreme voltage. I'm like, it thinks there's extreme voltage when the computer's not on. So I think there's something wrong with the power conditioner, right? Because I also have another power strip plugged into the outlet right next to it, and that computer over there is fine. I have a whole nother 1,000-watt computer plugged into the same plug, and it's fine. Anyway, sorry about that. Is it okay to have a lot of dialogue? Yes. In fact, dialogue is what carries your story. So even when you're writing a book, readers will skip prose. They don't tell you this a lot, but readers skip prose. They're quite happy to skip prose, actually. They never skip dialogue. So yeah, dialogue really carries your story. So you want it to be good. Yeah, you can have a lot of dialogue. In fact, you should have a lot of dialogue, and you should expect your story to be carried by the dialogue in your writing. So yes, very important. But you can write stories without dialogue. It's totally possible. Writing dialogue is more like lyric than speech. That's true to an extent. However, there's layers to that. There's a lot of layers to that because it depends how you want it to come across. Characters that you want to come across like Kevin Smith, casual, real characters are going to throw a lot of mannerisms. They're going to maybe talk fast. They'll maybe use curse words. The words that you choose and the way you choose to have the character say them say that a lot about the character. If you're having like an Elrond kind of character talk, of course he's going to use a more formal set of English. Like compare the Hobbits to like Elrond, either in the movies or in the books, and you see that there's like strong difference. And with Gandalf being having this wizardy kind of air to him, yet he's very down to earth, whereas the elves have a more aloof way of talking and referring to things. So the style that and then of course Sam, you can almost hear Sam's accent, that kind of West country accent, you know. Sean Astin does it pretty well. It was Gardner, right? Like the R's are present. You can almost feel that when you read Sam's dialogue. Dialogue has always been what I struggled the most when writing. Well, it's the toughest part to get perfect, I think. Yeah. For me, it's describing people and settings. Okay. Speaking of your balls, do you have a new girlfriend, Bob? I make a distinction between dialogue that serves the scene versus the world. Scene is like, watch out. And the world is like diving into the corruption of the Republic. Needs to be a balance. Yeah, I've also talked about something that usually people pick up on, which is what I call expositional dialogue, where people tell things to each other that they already know in order to tell the audience something. It's like, Bob, I see you're wearing your black leather jacket that you got in 1969 when you beat up a hippie and stole it at Woodstock. Like you wouldn't say that to your friend, right? You just be like, oh, you're wearing that jacket again. And then you could say, wrong. But in movies, you often have to rely on it because you don't have the prose. You don't have like paragraphs of prose to explain stuff to the audience, kind of as an aside, you know. So you have to do it through dialogue. This creates a lot of awkward moments in The Phantom Menace. So if you're watching The Phantom Menace, one of my complaints about it is the dialogue. It's not a terrible movie. It might be my least favorite of the prequels, I suppose. But it has a lot of these moments where characters are sitting around saying things to each other that they already know. And the audience picks up on this. They're like, if the dialogue feels stilted or unnatural, it doesn't feel like these are the things that these characters would actually say. And the reason that we can feel that is that they're saying things that they wouldn't say because they wouldn't say things to each other that they already know. What you need in a scene like that, if you want to tell the audience something through dialogue, what you need is a character that's not normally part of the world. This is a classic fantasy trope, but it works so well. The fish out of water trope. You have a character from another world. You have someone from our world, and then they show up in the scene, and they're like, "So how does this work?" And they're like, "Oh, forget. You're from that other weird world." Well, this is how the kingdom works, and so they can just explain it to him, and thereby explain it to the audience. But you know, you wouldn't have the king and the like counselor sit around and explain how taxes work. You know, your weird tax system. Brandon Sanderson will just do this in like prose when it's appropriate. He doesn't like info dump all the time. He's pretty good about it. So he'll just stop in the prose and, you know, here's the money system. Or, oh, good to know the money system because like that was a part of the way that he built the world. Good stuff, Brandon. Yeah. I'm not a real writer, but I find dialogue to be difficult to get started. Once you get into it, it becomes easy to overindulge and spend too much time on a simple conversation. Yeah. Have a goal, just like anytime you write a scene, have a goal for the scene, right? In this scene, this thing is happening. Okay, I'm going to write a scene and I'm going to have this thing happen in it. The characters are going to reveal this information. After they've revealed that information and the thing has happened in the scene, on to the next scene. No need to linger and write extra stuff. So again, you come back to planning. If you know what you're writing in the scene, if you have planned it in advance, it's very, very easy to not go overboard because once you accomplish the goals of the scene, you just move on to the next scene. Oh, I can make this even brighter. Let's see how good this camera really is on this new phone. I had to buy a new phone. I hate buying new phones. I felt like I had at least 2 years on my old phone. But I was sitting there and I pulled out my phone to check a message and I was like holding a guitar and it fell onto my volume pedal. And my volume pedal is made of steel with very sharp corners. It's a Morley little alligator volume pedal. Never scratched the screen, never had a dent on this phone. Hit that corner. Spider webs all through the screen, unusable. Had to buy a new phone. And I was like, I could have actually bought the same phone again for pretty cheap. It was a Galaxy S10 Plus. I talked to my wife about it. It's like, well, you buy that. Are you going to be buying a new phone in 2 years? The answer is yes. It's like, then you should just buy the the good phone. I know this is not about dialogue, but it's good. Like buy good equipment. I've talked about this before. Um, buy ahead of the curve, buy the good thing, and then you won't have to buy another phone for 5 years. And don't break this one. And that's something I have to think. It's like, should I take into account the fact that this phone broke, right? I haven't broken a phone really before. I had a phone break under warranty and get replaced, but I've never had a phone like I dropped it and it shattered to pieces. It was like, and I saw it falling. No, this is what happened. I'm sorry. I misremembered. Yeah, I wasn't checking a message. I was pulling it out, but I had a cat. The cat jumped in my lap, right? So, you know, guitar, cat, phone, there goes the phone down onto the, and I just saw it falling. You know, when something bad happens, you remember it in slow motion. You're just like, oh no, that's the end of the phone. And you pause for a second there. You're like, that's it. She's done. That's all she wrote, friends. I'm going to have to spend hundreds of dollars on a new phone. You can hear I didn't clean my desk up recently. So I have the aluminum cans to prove it. A little more direct. Just a little better. There we go. Okay. So yeah. I'm like, oh man. Anyway, I ended up with a Sony phone. I'm a weirdo. I said years ago, I'm like, I'm never buying a phone that doesn't have a headphone jack. There's like one company that still makes a really good phone with a headphone jack. That's Sony. You can hate Sony, you can love Sony. It has a headphone jack, and it's a really good phone. The camera's really good on it. It's like the best. I don't know if it's the best camera, but it has the most options. All right. Sounds like something George R. R. Martin would include. Pooping in armor. He actually would, but he would do it in such a way as like he would still advance the plot or set something up with it that was important. And like George R. R. Martin's actually a really good writer. So sometimes I talk crap on George R. R. Martin, like he doesn't put his book out, or like, his books are soap operas. But he's very good at executing, and he writes really good dialogue. His dialogue is like he knows exactly what he's doing, so he reveals stuff about the characters, and he moves the plot forward every time anytime that a character speaks. He's really good at it, so he's a good one to look at for dialogue. I like Stephen King's dialogue a lot. However, he wastes a lot of time with dialogue, with banter and stuff. I think because he doesn't always know where the story is going. He has an idea, probably on each scene, something that needs to happen, but not like where the ending is relative to what he's doing. He doesn't outline. And you can tell when you're reading a book, like the first third of a Stephen King book is always just like freaking dynamite because that's the setup. Then you can tell in the middle of the book whether he's going to like stick a landing or not. Things will either get really boring or really good. And if they get really good, you know that you're going to be headed towards some kind of good ending. And then half the time he just kind of will have to rush to the ending because there's just no easy way to pace your way there. But if he gets to a good ending, it's usually pretty decent. Have you ever listened to 1930s radio? Pick up their styles of dialogue writing. The comedy ones are especially useful for witty banter. They're pretty good. For comedy banter, I actually really like Oscar Wilde, even though it's old. But it does a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. The characters reveal who they are, they reveal their motivations, they reveal what they're going to do in the future, and they deal with situations in the present and move the plot forward every time they talk. It's a stage play, and stage plays are really good to study for this. Shakespeare, what is Shakespeare? It's all dialogue, right? It's just characters talking. It's all dialogue. So a stage play, because it's all dialogue, and because the visual aspect is so much more limited on a stage production, you have to do more with your dialogue. Your dialogue has to be even more effective than it would have to be in a movie. In a movie, you have film work to fill in whatever gaps you want. You can do so much just by showing the audience something. You can have action sequences, you can have landscape shots. What can you do in stage? Lights up, characters walk out. Yeah, there's some scenery. Thus, the story begins with the dialogue. So I like Oscar Wilde a lot, and I really like his dialogue. I like Tennessee Williams's dialogue. It's very on point for the kind of stories that he tells. Now, if you don't like Tennessee Williams's stuff like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof or The Glass Menagerie is a good one. The Glass Menagerie is just a couple of scenes of people, but they're revealing all kinds of things about themselves and their past through a dialogue that's happening in the present. So that stuff's good to study as well. It's very efficient. How does Tennessee Williams tell a story that's, a gentleman caller coming and talking to this girl with a leg brace and they're remembering high school? And then he like drops he breaks the glass unicorn and like, what does that mean? Like all that stuff is really tight, and it's the action's all in the present, and it's just people talking, but what they're revealing is like a backfilled story that sets up all the facts you need to interpret the events that happen towards the end of the play. So just as an example, right? um, yeah, I can safely say this is one writing I wish I could match George on. His dialogue's good. um, Dialogue's easier and faster to read than prose since characters often speak one sentence at a time. That's a good point. It's also formatted in a way when you're reading a book that it's very easy to see dialogue, whereas prose is a big paragraph and you can lose your place. Complex sentences, right? Because we're trying to write pretty when we write prose most of the time. I think there's something to be said for just functional prose, like you know Brandon Sanderson writes mostly functional prose, whereas other writers tend to be a little more florid, Steinbeck or something. And that's fine. Like the Steinbeck will have like hoop de doodle, like that's what Elmore Leonard call it all hoop de doodle, and then dialogue. So the dialogue, it's like each line is separated because of the way you format it, the way that you're supposed to format dialogue. And see, I had a whole thing. Maybe I'll do another stream on dialogue just because you may need to see the visuals of what I'm talking about. But I also want to do it on prose, and I want to like write some live prose. But you have a character. Hello, said Bill. Next line. Good day, said Bob. We can see really clearly who said it and how they said it with the quotes or the tags, depending on what language you're operating in. Uh, when you step outside the English language, there's a little bit different traditions for how you frame dialogue. I like the way that we do it in English language novels. It's really easy to read. Um, and when you step outside that formatting, it annoys me because it slows down the flow of reading. Readers have to stop and think, and maybe that's intentional. But there's writers like postmodern writers who intentionally like avoid quotation marks and stuff like that. I'm not really for that, but you'll find it with translations of other languages where quotation marks are not part of that tradition. Just so you know. Anyway, you see those quotes. It's really easy to tell who said what, how they're saying it. You can even skip the stuff about how they're saying it, and then you can read like 2 pages of dialogue in the time it would take to read one paragraph of prose because it's just easier to read. It's just quicker, easier to understand what they're saying, who's saying what. It plays out more like a play. So it is easier and faster to read. That's totally there. Uh, Simpler sentences, more direct, and you can guess as a reader from experience. The dialogue will always be story relevant, but the prose not always, right? The prose is describing this beautiful valley. It's gorgeous, this valley. Doesn't matter, right? What matters is what the characters do, not how pretty the ground. Skipping prose is something that a lot of readers just kind of do automatically. Or if they get the paragraph and they're like, I'm bored, they just skip to the next dialogue. And I've known like people, it's not like a literacy thing. I've known people who are great readers. They're like, I don't have time for all that crap. If I don't like the prose, and maybe the author just doesn't write prose that you like, you're just like, skip. It'd be like picking up a metal album and there's like a bunch of little interludes, like orchestra interludes. I'm thinking of maybe like Gods of War by Manowar. What happens when that orchestra interlude comes on after you've heard the album one time? You guys know what's up. Next. Oh, track 4 in the Dragon Force album. It's time for that ballad. Next. Just skip it, man. I want the shredding. I don't want the I don't want the little ballad, the Dragon Force ballad. Just shred harder. Okay. That's what you get. Like, what would somebody skip the ballad on a Cannibal Corpse album? I don't know, but probably. That's probably why Cannibal Corpse doesn't stop and do a lot of ballads, right? If I were to guess what track on Sound of Perseverance by Death gets skipped all the time, it's the acoustic guitar track. I'm guessing people get to that and they're like, it's okay. Next. Um, as you know, let me tell you something you already know, and you know it. You do that comically. Bender loves mobs, only when he's part of one, and you know it. I actually do know a lot of people love to recap things I already know, so it's not that out of place. I think it is. I don't know anyone who does that personally. Unless you're sitting down and you're like, hey, where have you been for 5 years? So if like characters are meeting again after a long time, they can tell a story. That's stuff they don't already know. Whereas they wouldn't meet at work and be like, hi, Bob, what are you doing today? Well, my job is I am an electrical engineer, so I am working on quality assurance for the line. Oh, the same thing you do every day. Yes, the same thing I do every day. Maybe you can make a joke out of it, right? Like, what are you doing? I'm doing the same thing I do every day. I'm doing quality checks on this part of the manufacturing line or something, right? Um, I wish they would have started Star Wars prequels at the Clone Wars. I agree. That was kind of the assessment that Brian Niemeyer and I came to, was like the biggest knock against the Phantom Menace is that if you if it didn't exist, it wouldn't change anything about the story. You wouldn't lose anything. It just didn't need to exist. Reading people's rewrite ideas for the prequels are more fun than the prequels themselves, in my humble opinion. I love the idea of people have asked me about it, and I'm like, I have to stop and think, like, you know what? You can like it or hate it. That was George's vision for his world and his project. So just like let it be. Let it be, you know, let it be. Let it be George's thing. And instead, think of your energies of like how I would have done it differently as a starting place for how would I do my story in a way that I like, you know. Same reason I don't do fan fiction. Like, why would I spend time writing fan fiction? No matter how much I love a character, even at 14, I'd be like, you know what? I should just write my own book because it'll be mine at least. I hate Sony with a passion on so many levels for so many reasons. They still make decent headsets though, and I guess phones. I buy cheap phones. They make great phones. Like this phone is awesome. It's probably the best phone I've ever owned. Believe me, I wasn't thinking of buying like a Sony phone unless it was like, okay, I can either go really cheap to have a headphone jack, in which case I'll just buy like an old, you can buy like an S10 or something, or I have to buy Sony because like no one else is offering a headphone jack, and it's such an essential thing. And what I love about the Sony phone, I hate to go off on this tangent again, is like the headphone jack is not just a headphone jack, it's a microphone input. You can put a shotgun mic into your Sony phone. It has like a pro video mode. It's got a bunch of stuff that is like just ahead of most other phones for creative people. Like if I want to actually shoot footage that I'm going to use, this phone does it better. And I felt that way about like my Samsung phone I had too, is that it had options for shooting stuff that was just better. And I felt that way about the Pixel back when I got the original Pixels. Like I could hook up external mics, I could do all kinds of things that I couldn't do with like an iPhone for getting what I want visually and framing things the way I want visually versus like relying on the good practices of the manufacturer to come up with like what is generally the best way for most people to do things. You know what I mean? Anyway, I enjoyed reading A Song of Ice and Fire. Just feel like it was a waste of my life at this point with no conclusion. Could have done other things with that time. Yeah, I feel that this is why I don't watch a lot of series, guys. Is I'm like, if it's not done, I just gonna feel like I waste my time. I don't like to waste my time. I have so little of it, and my time is so impacted right now in my life. It's like the most impacted it's ever been. I have to be really intentional with my time. You know, I wrote a whole book on it, but like I have to take it to another level, even better than I've done before. Be more intentional with my time. Be more aware of how I'm wasting my time. Stick more stuff in the margins. Pick and choose much better the things that I do and I don't do on a daily basis. Um, and pick and choose which projects I'm going to take up. It's like I would love to be working like on the visual novel that I planned like at this point a year and a half ago. But I have such a backlog of books I need to clear out. I have to finish writing those and editing those and doing all the publishing stuff. I have to publish those books before I'm going to allow myself to do other projects. You know, I can't do three other projects. Like I invested a whole month in doing a music channel because I figured out like I had a plan for what I was going to develop musically so that I could have my instrumental music channel, the Zool online channel. I had to be really intentional about that. While I was doing that, I wasn't writing any books. I just couldn't do it, and I wasn't doing a whole lot of other content on YouTube either. You know, so I wasn't definitely wasn't watching any series. Uh, Phantom Menace shows the Jedi didn't want to train Anakin because he had darkness inside him, but Qui-Gon insisted. But he died, and Obi-Wan had to take over for his master. That's not. It's actually not that important, right? Because uh, you know, anyone could have done that. You get the gist of that in the second one, just fine. Like it backfills really well. You could actually skip the Phantom Menace and not lose anything on the story at all. He goes back to show where his mom is. Like you figure out even where his mom is from the second movie. Like you just don't need the Phantom Menace. You just don't need it. How often should you use those tags? He said, etc. I feel like using too many because it really goes stale. But what if you have like a Council of Elrond top scene? Okay, great question. Again, I wish I could just have it on my computer, but technology is not working today. But I'll describe it as best I can, and maybe in another stream, I'll show it. He said, she said. So we call those dialogue tags. Let's start with how often do you need them? Well, if you have two characters talking and they're going back and forth, you don't need them. So let's say you have Gandalf and Elrond, and they're the only people talking. Gandalf says this, Elrond says this. The next one, you don't have to say Gandalf said. You can, but you can just have a dialogue with quotes, no tags. People know who said it. Elrond says something again. As long as it's just those two, you don't need any tags. Problem is when you have, like, yes, Council of Elrond, you have 8 different people. Anytime that a character speaks, a new character speaks, you got to tag it, right? So it's as soon as you get more than 2, if you have 3, it's like Gandalf. So let's say you have Gandalf, Elrond, Gandalf, he doesn't need a tag. Elrond doesn't need a tag. Bilbo says something. Well, we have to say Bilbo said. And then let's say we have, they're like going Gandalf, Elrond, Bilbo. That's a little annoying. What you can do is rather than saying Gandalf said, Bilbo said, Elrond said, you can change where you put them. You can say, uh, I understand this, comma, Gandalf said, but we need to do this in the next part of the quote. So you're putting the said in the middle of the dialogue. Then you can say Elrond spoke up, right? You don't say said. You can use something other than said. Now, I've said this before. You don't want to be the guy who's trying to go to the thesaurus to find every word that you could use that's not said. You can use some words that aren't said, or you can say, you can tag the dialogue without saying that he said something, without a verb that carries the dialogue. So you can say, Gandalf scratched his beard. You're right. Gandalf scratched his beard. I think this counsel is unwise, right? We know Gandalf said it because we have next to the dialogue, Gandalf scratched his beard. So you can have the characters do something, preferably something that reveals who they are or what they're feeling, right? Gandalf frowned and rubbed his beard. Put that on. Gandalf frowned and rubbed his beard. We know Gandalf is talking. Elrond looked at the mountains. Then Elrond says something. Okay, so having characters do something works as a dialogue tag and gets rid of that feeling of he said, she said. There's debate as to whether readers read said tags or not, or if it's just like when you're reading the script for like a play or a movie, you don't read Daryl, blah blah blah, Bob, blah blah blah, right? You read the dialogue and know that Daryl said it, right? You don't think Daryl, right? You don't think Daryl said. There's debates as to whether that occurs in prose. Some people, I think, actually read in their mind, Daryl said. That's okay. So put the action in, and then you won't feel like you're saying said so much. You're breaking up the dialogue. You're showing the audience who's saying what, and you're avoiding having something that feels repetitive. We don't want anything to feel repetitive. We want everything to flow when we're writing prose, when we're writing a novel. We don't want things to be like da 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 da. Now you can use that for effect. He came, he saw, he conquered, right? The repetition of the phrase helps emphasize it. So it's not a never thing. You just want to be aware that, like, if you say, he walked to the door, he opened the door, he looked out in the hallway, he stepped into the hallway, that sounds really monotonous, right? You'd be like, he walked to the door and opened it. Looking out in the hallway, he noticed no one was there. So he lightly stepped out into it. We're breaking up like a series of actions so that it flows. It doesn't feel like he did it, he walked, he opened, he drank, he brought, right? So we do the same thing with dialogue. We use an action to show who's saying something. We can also use replacements for said. Now, this is my big caution. Big caution. Don't use a lot of replacements for said. Only replace the verb said if it's going to change how the dialogue is interpreted. That's going to be my rule of thumb, my rule of thumbs. Okay. I'll give you an example. Let's think of a dialogue. It's coming. How can our tags significantly change it? If I say Daryl, let's say a character Daryl is going to say it's coming. It's coming, Daryl said. That's neutral. Doesn't reveal a lot about what he's saying. It's just information. It's coming, Daryl shouted. Now we think it's something dangerous. Okay. It's coming. Ooh, there's a tension there. We still think it's something dangerous, but the fact that he whispered it means he's not shouting, look out. He's like, wait, there's something back. That's coming. Right. So whispered, shouted. What I personally would avoid for any dialogue tags are these really out there things like ejaculated. He I don't know. I can't think of too many because I don't really use them. But sometimes you read them. I've seen books even now that still have them. Like they had some teacher in like junior high who's like, you can't use said more than once, and so they were getting the thesaurus out to be like he shouted, he cried, he whispered, he said, he expressed, he exclaimed, he interlocuted, he ejaculated, he expounded, right? Avoid all that crap. Use what is going to alter how it's said. Now, this is the next thing that I'll say about dialogue tags. Often you don't need to add more than he said. And it's the same thing. You add more than that if you need to give extra information for how that dialogue is being delivered by a character. So let me think of an example. Harry pulled at his hair. I can't believe you did this. Now we didn't write, he shouted. He pulled at his hair, but him pulling at his hair expresses something about this. Versus Harry's face remained calm. I can't believe you did this. Two wildly different interpretations of the same dialogue. Most dialogue is informational and doesn't need any of that stuff. And even if it does, a lot of times you don't need it because you can, through the dialogue itself, understand how the character is expressing it. I can't believe you did this. What a betrayal, right? We get the idea that the character's probably angry. He's probably emoting significantly as he says the dialogue. We don't need to be like, I can't believe you did this, Harry emoted. He angrily shouted. Right? We don't need that. J.K. Rowling puts in a lot of adverbs. She has a young reader. I mean, she's writing it for young readers. Adverbs, I think, are fine if you need to add that information. But if you don't need that information, if that information is in the dialogue itself, cut the adverb. So if I were editing your book and it's like you had adverbs, it's okay. Write the way you want and then have the editor look at it and be like, you don't need any of these adverbs. Boom, boom. Cut all these. We don't need them. They're just going to distract and be annoying seeing 20 adverbs on the page, right? I would say that to someone who uses a lot of adverbs, but it might leave some in. That's like, yeah, we need to know that he said it sadly, or we need to know that he said it loudly, right? And the thing is, like, adverbs create a lot of shade of meaning. This is just another side thing, but you see it a lot with dialogue tags, like adverbs. Adverbs create a lot of shades of meaning, so you don't want to just throw those shades of meaning out by being like, no adverbs. He said quietly. It's not the same as whispering. Whispering is this. Saying quietly is this. He spoke with a soft voice. You don't have to use adverbs. But when I say he spoke with a soft voice, what am I really saying? He spoke softly, right? So you can just put the adverb in there, right? So people will come up with all kinds of ways to avoid adverbs because they heard some writing advice somewhere like, adverbs bad. I'm like, readers don't really care about adverbs, especially if you use them well. And if they're informational, people like adverbs just fine. You know. Anyway, I've gone off on the deep end with that stuff before. Use adverbs, it's fine, but you want to avoid them if they're not necessary. You only use them when they're necessary, and no one will honestly complain. Unless they're like an idiot. Idiots complain about everything. This is the thing you have to deal with book reviews is that you're going to have idiots who read your book and they're not going to like something about it that they don't understand. Like I've had people complain about words that are misspelled and the word is not misspelled. Like or they're like, oh, you said this here. Like was come. It's like, no, that's actually what I meant to write. That is proper English. But you just don't know it because maybe this person hasn't ever read anything before about 1950. So if I'm using something that's maybe a little older feeling, I do it because I like the way it feels, I like the way it sounds. I'm pretty intentional with the stuff that I do. Um, you know, I've had stuff like that. There's gonna be people who would give you 2 stars because you use adverbs. These people are stupid, right? You don't need to pay attention to them. The things that the criticism you want to pay attention to are things like the chapters, the middle of the book seemed like it dragged and wasn't going anywhere. Okay, well, let me think about, maybe there was too much information I was trying to convey at that point, or I just needed to have this next event happen earlier. You could think about that kind of feedback a little bit differently versus like, I don't like adverbs. I didn't like the main character. Great. This book seems like it was written for teenagers. And I've seen like people give 2-star reviews for books that are written for teenagers. Oh, it reads like a book written for a 13-year-old. It was. It's a mermaid romance book, right? It's vampire romance. It's for 13-year-old girls. Well, it just seems like it's written for a young audience. It was. It's like reading C.S. Lewis. Story is so simple. It's like it's written for children. Yeah. um, shows that what the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan is based on. Yeah, but you honestly get that in the second one. Just fine. There's more relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan in episode 2 than episode 1 has virtually nothing about it. I've heard that the novelization of the prequels are much better than the movies. I haven't read them, so I don't know. I don't usually read novelizations unless I'm really curious about them. You know, uh, unless I just like, I don't know. I've read a couple over the years, but not usually. If you start with Empire Strikes Back, you wouldn't have really missed anything that couldn't be covered in the scrawl. Well, I think you would. I mean, you'd miss, like, it would be really weird to see Obi-Wan's ghost. You wouldn't know why they're looking for Luke Skywalker or what the Death Star was, or Han's background. I think you do need the first Star Wars movie, actually. Ray Bradbury started out by writing John Carter fan fiction. I wouldn't write it though. I'd be like, no, I'd rather spend my time writing something else, right? But of course, you could write. You could write Sherlock Holmes. You could write and publish Sherlock Holmes stories and shadow stories. I think those are in the public domain now too. Maybe even Solomon Kane. The first 2 Solomon Kane stories are in the public domain. So, and I think Conan is as well, but like the Conan is a trademark of a holding company that somehow captured the Conan trademark. So you actually could publish Conan stories, but you can't say Conan the Barbarian in, you know, Backstreet's Back. All right. I don't know. Um, yeah, you'd have to call it like the Chimerian. Like someone came out with a Conan comic, they called it the Chimerian because, uh, and the thing is, you could probably get that trademark just like blocked in court, but nobody wants to spend the money on that. Like, why would you do that? Yeah, I'm going to publish a Conan story. I'm going to call it Conan the Barbarian in Backstreet's Back. All right. I'm going to let this guy sue me, and then I'm going to take it to the mattresses to prove that you can't actually trademark Conan, you know. And the holding company just licenses Conan out to like Marvel and different things. Um, the prequels are Legos that need to plug neatly into an already established thing and accomplish certain things. I just feel the prequels wasted a lot of time. That's just me. If you look at them as their own thing, I think they're better. I actually don't think they fit that well with the OT. Like, but I don't think they go together all that well. Believe it or not, I think they just sort of work better as their own standalone thing. But you're right; they're always referencing things in those follow-up movies. Like you see the Death Star plans and things like that. So I don't know. I started watching a show from 2000 called Higher Ground that stars Hayden Christensen. The irony is hilarious. And the comments on YouTube are all about Obi-Wan versus Anakin. Uh, the higher ground. I have the higher ground. New Hope and Phantom Menace both kind of have standalone structures. Phantom Menace does have a kind of standalone structure. That's good. Phantom Menace was needed for world building. I don't think you actually need it. You like never go back to Naboo. You don't really need it. I'm sorry. I think you do go back to Naboo, but like you don't see the Gungans. Like the most of the content of the story, it's just not that necessary. Maybe a couple things. Maybe like you need to pull a couple details in, or really you start with episode 2, and then that'll be episode 1. It's like Attack of the Clones. Episode 2 is the Clone Wars, and episode 3 is Revenge of the Sith. I think all the Palpatine stuff is adequately covered in Clones and Revenge, even if you leave them as they are without rewrites. I really agree. We're talking about Stephen King again. You have a nice butt, he said cheekily. Is my personal favorite use of an adverb. Thank you for expounding on dialogue. Okay, you're welcome. Can also summarize a conversation. They argued back and forth. Yes, so this is another thing. They talked until sunrise about women and tobacco. You can summarize. You don't need to put that. You can explain how they felt about talking to each other, and that works too. That just gets to a shortcut. And in a movie, you would like have a fade out, you know. And comics, by the way, you write it pretty much the same way movies because you have that visual aspect to carry a lot of it, but you still may use narrative boxes. Often underused are those narrative boxes. People will complain about in comics like a wall of dialogue. That's boring, right? We get the feeling like that's too much dialogue, and the dialogue clearly isn't moving anything forward. And every example I've seen of that, of like, here's a thing and just like a wall of dialogue bubbles of the character talking about herself or something. It's like none of that is necessary for the story. It's just somebody being self-indulgent about how they feel about a character and remaking the character like themselves or whatever it's going to be. I think that Solomon Kane is trademarked too. You might be right. Someone wrote some stories about a knockoff of him named Gideon Kane. Tarzan and John Carter are trademarked by the Burroughs estate. Yeah. So this is one of those things that it's just complex to talk about when you talk about copyright versus trademark. So the Skull and the Stars, which is a Solomon Kane story, is in the public domain. That means I can publish it freely or for money if I want. I can record an audiobook for it. There's one on the channel. I can write derivative works based on it. Trademark is something else, though. Trademark is something that is indelibly bound to an entity like a company. So the golden arches of McDonald's are a trademark of McDonald's. That M and the way it looks identifies to people that they are at a McDonald's restaurant. So if you put that M on your restaurant, you're violating trademark. You are using the marks of their trade to deceive the customer into thinking they are going to a McDonald's restaurant. That's what trademark is. Things get very fuzzy when you realize things like Wookiee are trademarked. It's like, how is Wookiee trademarked? Well, Wookiees and Luke Skywalker are indelibly bound up in the brand of Disney and Star Wars. Okay, weird, right? But yeah, you have that. So there's debate as to whether that would actually like carry out in court. Most people don't want to litigate that though. It's so expensive. You don't want to be in a litigation ever if you can avoid it. And why would you want to be in a litigation for like the Solomon Kane character? You wouldn't do that unless you had a strong financial incentive to do so. Like you really wanted to come out with a Conan movie and just not pay. It'd be cheaper to pay the licensing fee to the holding company than to try to take them to court to prove that you can't trademark Conan the Barbarian because it's based on a public domain figure, right? A figure from a public domain work. So no one does it. It'd be interesting if somebody was willing to take it to the mattresses as far as trademark goes, but I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't want that expense, and I wouldn't want to lose, right? I wouldn't, who's got an extra 10 million in the bank to like put the word Conan the Barbarian into the public domain as well as the character? I don't know anyone that's going to do that. So yeah, this is the difference between like trademark and copyright. Copyright's attached to the work, like the book, whereas trademark is attached to things that are bound up in the company. And like my trademark green hat. You may have heard something like that. Like trademark white guitar, whatever it is. It's not really a trademark, but there are really good examples actually of guitars with trademark. in lawsuits between Gibson and various other companies. And the latest one that they actually won was a lawsuit against Dean Guitars. Is this trademark? Yeah, this is Jungle Cruise. It's the Jungle Cruise shirt. It's a good shirt, you know. I'm gonna turn on the fan because it is hot. It's just getting a little warm. That's all. All right, so yeah, trademarks. So Gibson actually sued Dean Guitars successfully because they made several guitars which were shaped like Gibson guitars, like a V. They made like a V-shaped guitar. You know, the back was like a V. And they made a guitar that was, I believe, shaped like the Explorer or maybe the Les Paul. Either one. Dean has another shape that's like the V and the Explorer put together that Dimebag Darrell famously played. And he had models with Washburn, not just Dean, and like Dean never sued Washburn over it. The debate over this is whether those shapes are inseparable from the Gibson brand. In other words, would a consumer be deceived? Would they buy a Dean guitar and think they're buying a Gibson guitar because of the shape of the guitar? And the court kind of ruled yes, which is really weird because Gibson had not sued people for. You can get V-shaped guitars from all kinds of manufacturers. You can get Les Paul shaped guitars from all kinds of manufacturers. You can get Explorer shaped guitars from ESP and from everybody else and their mom. Why they chose to sue Dean, I'm not really sure. Maybe because Dean is an American company and it makes the lawsuit simpler. Um, but yeah, the shape of the guitar can be captured as a trademark. That's proven now. So, you know, Fender had never been able to defend its like the shape of a Stratocaster guitar as a trademark. Maybe they should, right? Like 9/10 of beginner guitars are shaped like this because it's a classic shape that works for everything. You can change out the parts, you know, um, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about. Even the shape of an instrument can be subject to trademark, just like the golden arches at McDonald's. If somebody like, and I think this is a, I'm trying to think. I watched a YouTuber. I don't remember who said this, but this was a really good way of putting it. It's like, let's say you're a guitar player. You're never getting fooled. Nobody who plays guitar thinks that Dean is a Gibson. Dean is a different brand from Gibson. We know that. It's not that Deans are good guitars; they're fine, but we know that they're not a Gibson guitar. In fact, I would buy a Dean before I bought a Gibson personally. I mean, like I've had Gibson guitars. I kind of want one just so that I have one. Just so it's like, yeah, I have a Les Paul, right? Or I had an SG, but the headstocks snap off of them. It's not just a meme. I traded my SG for that Fender. Uh, Plus, I traded the SG plus some stuff to get that Fender. Even though the SG now would be like expensive compared to the Fender, right? It'd be more valuable. But it didn't matter. I really liked this Fender. It belonged to my friend Mike, who's also a musician and a former Navy SEAL. Really cool guy. I should like plug my friends more, like get him to perform more on Twitch and like plug it. But anyway, I really like this guitar. So I traded around for that. His stepson like knocked the guitar down and the headstock snapped. Okay, I did kind of a shoddy repair on it. It snapped again. Did another, had to do two repairs on the headstock. It snapped, then it like snapped again, like 3 millimeters away from that repair. That's not just a meme. And it's because they make that one piece mahogany neck. Anyway, yeah, I'd buy a Dean because they would use probably a maple neck or they'd use a scarf joint for the headstock, which won't snap off. But Gibson has always made that one piece mahogany neck, and that's what they do. So I might have, I mean, I would love to have a Gibson just to complete the collection. And be like, I have a Gibson. I have a Guild and I have a Gibson. I have like the classic American brands. I've got all of them. You know, I've got the Fender, the Music Man, the Gibson, the Guild. Maybe there's one more classic American brand I need, like a G&L or something. Most people don't think of those as too classic, but you know, I have the classic American brands down, and like the classic American guitars, Telecaster, Strat, Les Paul. Of course, you can collect all the Gibson shapes, an SG. I prefer the SG to the Les Paul a little bit, but anyway, yeah, they can trademark that shape. But let's say your wife was buying the guitar, right? I'm never going to mistake a Dean guitar for a Gibson guitar. But let's say my wife is like, I want to buy my husband a guitar. She goes down. I think that's the guitar he likes. It's like the one that Slash plays. And she buys it and gives it to him. And it's like, it's a Dean. It's not a Gibson. Now, if my wife bought me a Dean guitar, I'd be like, awesome, thank you, right? Dean guitars are good. But if somebody's like, why wouldn't you buy me a Dean when you know that I love Gibson guitars? Well, it looked the same, and I don't know about guitars because I'm just a wife who went into Guitar Center to meet a man. That's what it was. Um, so yeah, I could totally see that happening. It's like I bought you a guitar, and it's like that's not a Fender. You bought me like a hammer. You bought me a Hamer brand. I don't know. I'm trying to think of some like off brands. Everyone makes like an off brand Fender, right? But my wife wouldn't get have a mistake because she's like known to like okay Fender. My husband has all these Fender brand guitars. You know, uh, they're Fenders. It's like these are Music Man guitars. So that's anyway. That's a fun little thing. I think you can make a case that like somebody would who's not knowledgeable would buy a Dean thinking it's a Gibson because it's a high quality guitar. It looks nice and it's the same shape. That's all. Now in Japan, you can buy all kinds of guitars that are the same shape and are actually better than Gibson guitars. So an Edwards, if you want a Les Paul and you don't care about that word, that Gibson headstock, you don't care about that. Check out Edwards guitars. They're made in Japan. It's an ESP brand, so it's the same family as ESP. They're usually made in Japan. Very high quality, better than Gibson's quality control, if I'm being honest. And I usually feel that way about Japanese instruments. Like, if you're like, hey, do you want to buy a buffet or a Yamaha clarinet? I also play clarinet. A lot of people don't know this, right? So you want to buy a French buffet or you want to buy a Yamaha CS? Sight unseen, unheard. Give me the Yamaha. I know exactly how that Yamaha CS is going to feel, play, sound, everything. It's going to sound exactly the same and feel exactly the same as every other Yamaha CS that came out of that factory. Or so close, I won't have to worry about it. Their Yamaha's quality control is top notch. I know this from experience. You can play 10 buffet clarinets, you're going to get 10 different sounds. You can play 10 Selmer clarinets, you're going to get 5 different sounds. Their quality control is just a lot better. You play 10 of the same model. I mean, right? I have my actual main clarinet is a Selmer signature, which is a great clarinet, but it doesn't sound quite the same as other Selmer signatures or feel the same, right? Same thing with buffets. This one is open. This one has a tighter feel. This one, Yamahas are all the same. So anyway, you buy an Edwards guitar. They are really good. They sound really good. There's also, if you want a budget ESP, there's the Grassroots brand. Grassroots makes a Hatsune Miku signature guitar that I would totally get if I just had the money sitting around because I have the Hello Kitty. I want the Hatsune Miku, right? I gotta get the blue Hatsune. The Hatsune Miku, it's like its own unique shape and everything too. And it's a good guitar. It's actually really good. The hardware on it's really good, and it's wired up in a way that would be really useful for playing pretty much anything you want to play. Anyway, yeah, ESP brands, they make several other brands, including Edwards, that are just Gibson copies, but good ones. Aria, the Aria brand, I have an Aria acoustic guitar actually, but if you can grab old Aria Pro 2 guitars from the 80s, they are awesome. The original Yngwie Malmsteen signature guitar, I believe, was an Aria Pro 2. It was a copy of a Fender, but the way that he did his Fenders with like the scalloped fretboard and everything. And he had them as backup guitars in the 80s until he got like an actual endorsement deal with Fender, which was always his dream. But he played those guitars also in the 70s. He's like, you get these copies from Japan, they're like exact copies. So you can get Edwards guitars and there'll be copies of like the best things Gibson did, not copies of what Gibson does now or what Gibson did in like 2012 or something like that. It's like really good copies of Gibson. They look great, sound great, great quality control. A little bit different headstock that I actually think is maybe slightly better, right? The reason the G strings go out of tune on Gibson headstocks is that there's a bend and a long travel to where that is. And I have a Guild that has a really similar headstock arrangement. And yeah, that third string tends to get bound up in that nut. This is one reason why companies like DC and Marvel do things like get rid of Superman's hair curl. The little change uniforms, make Miles Morales Spider-Man, and part of the reason they race swap characters to get out of paying royalties to the original creators, change the character just enough to get out of it. So, all right, I don't think I'm not going to say 100%, but I think that that is mostly not true. The big complaint with most artists is they don't receive any royalties for anything that they've done at the comic book companies. And one of the things about when I think of Image Comics in the 90s was that the creators kept ownership over their things. For them to pay royalties means that the person who wrote the comic or drew the comic has uh, owns the copyright. Almost always they're done work for hire. It's not the same as a novel at all. So I've heard this before, but I think for most people who work on comics, there's nothing to it. They get paid work for hire, just like how if you unless you negotiate for royalties separately, which you can do sometimes if you like have enough clout. Same thing with the movie script. Mostly movie scripts are done work for hire. Editing of the movie scripts is usually done work for hire, and they buy the script. They don't make the movie and then pay you royalties. They buy the script and most of them are done after that, right? But you can negotiate for royalties or things like that. So I've heard that. I don't think that that's really true. Like I don't think you could owe an artist royalty because you didn't put the curl on Superman. But there might be some legal, like really specific legal thing that got worked out there. I don't know every single detail, but for most artists, the fact is that they don't get crap for for back issues. Back issues don't sell anyway, and they won't get crap if they do new stuff based on some like, uh, you know, uh, Eric Larson might get paid royalties for reprints of Spider-Man comics he drew in the 80s, but he doesn't get royalties for the stuff that you know a later artist, like if Jim Lee drew a Spider-Man comic, they wouldn't have to pay Eric royalties on it. And I'm pretty sure Steve Ditko got paid nothing after he left Marvel for any of the stuff he did. Like I'm pretty sure he earned zero royalties on Spider-Man. And you can correct me, right? But I'm pretty sure like Steve Ditko didn't make crap for money after he left Marvel, and basically I don't know if he died a pauper, but he wasn't getting paid royalties for every issue of Spider-Man because it was done work for hire. It's almost always done work for hire. Um, and by the way, that's how you want to hire artists, writers. If you want to make a comic, you need to make sure that that comic is work for hire. You need to make sure when you hire a cover artist, it is work for hire. It is not a royalty arrangement. They are not co-creating with you, all right, legally, because you do not want to. If you want to take, let's say you come out with a comic and you've hired someone to draw it, you don't want to have to go and negotiate. You don't have to be cutting royalty checks every quarter. You don't want to have to go negotiate new royalties for some past thing. You want it to be work for hire so that you have control over it. And therefore, you also want to pay a fair rate so that person knows, like, hey, this is work for hire. Most artists are happy to do work for hire because one in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? They'd rather be paid a lump sum up front to do their work and get paid versus maybe you'll make royalties based on how well I market the book, right? You know, the cheapo movie studio, The Asylum, made ripoffs of current movies. Transmorphers. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Hoping people would buy or rent them by mistake. It worked. This is true. I remember one of these, and I'm trying to remember what it was. It's called like The Hobbits or something, and it was like about it was had nothing related to the Hobbits, but it was like it was like a ripoff movie. But they were able to use it for some reason, like Land of the Halflings. Uh, the it was just called like The Fellowship. It was one that I think it was just called The Fellowship, and it works. Yeah, people are like, oh, I don't think this is Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Blings. You mean you wouldn't rather have a Bundy or a Vito? Bundys and Vitos are fine. Yeah, they're fine resonite plastic clarinets, man. I've used them. They're fine. Bundys are I think a Selmer brand now. I'm trying to remember the name of the big company, American Instruments or something. You got to remember that these are brands, and they're managed. Um, okay, so this is an interesting thing about musical equipment. There is no Ibanez factory. Ibanez is a brand, and they hire other factories to make their instruments according to their spec and their measurements and everything like that. That's why you can have an Ibanez that's made in like Indonesia and one that's in Japan. There's a shop in Japan, right? There's no like Ibanez factory in China. There's a factory in China that Ibanez will contract with to make Ibanez instruments that are branded Ibanez and sell them. So management of a brand often involves making things at different factories. It's really weird. So a lot of those are brands, and like Guild guitars are not made in the same place. Like I have a Guild from 2001. They shut that factory down at some point and stopped making Guild electric guitars for several years. Made just acoustic guitars, and then they have a different factory. Now there's foreign made Guilds, which pisses me off. Right? It's like I was like, oh what? Dude, I can get this Guild Starfire for like $1,100. I'm like, wait a minute. Where's this made? Indonesia. You're making a Guild guitar in Indonesia? It's like making a Gibson in Indonesia. I did it with maybe the D'Angelico brand. They're making them in. They were having them made in foreign parts, and kind of relying on that ancient brand name to kind of carry it. Here's a hollow body guitar, D'Angelico, and you're like, it's kind of sucks. And you look at it, you're like, it's made in China. That's why it's $500. Okay, this is not worth $500 even. If it said Court on it, it'd be $300. Or Samick, they're made in Samic's factory. Samick will make instruments. Court will make instruments for people. There's a third one. The one that does. There's a big factory in Indonesia. I don't remember who owns it. I think actually Court might own the one in Indonesia. Court used to make a bunch of them in South Korea. That's where you used to get a lot of the Aria and Aria Pro 2s were made in South Korea. I have a South Korean one, and it's a pretty good instrument. But the workers started demanding a higher wage, and they're like, well, why don't we just move them down to, just go down to Indonesia. Let's tool up in Indonesia. So yeah, it's a brand. So when I see like foreign made Guilds, it's just like, it makes me sad, because what are they doing? Oh, here's this American brand with all of this brand recognition from like the 70s, and like we have a Kim Thale signature now, so we'll take that line and we'll have them made in Indonesia, and we'll have like a midline consumer. No, they might be good guitars. They're not the same. Not the same as like my beautiful maple top Guild. I'll go get it if you guys want to see it. You might look at it. Here, I'll go get it. It's another green guitar. I got to think about green guitars. Here we go. All right, here we go. All right, here's this bad boy. Hopefully not too many fingerprints on it, so you can kind of see what this looks like. Beautiful piece of quilted maple. It's nice, right? Now this trim on it, this is an aftermarket trim. It's made by Duesenberg out of Germany. German-made guitars. You can get Duesenberg guitars. They're really good, right? Like this is not an Indonesian-made guitar. See some of the buckle rash on the back, some battle scars. So I had played this guitar live many a time. It's comparable to a Gibson. It's a one-piece mahogany neck. I don't want to snap that headstock, but for whatever reason, The guild headstocks don't snap off, and I think the reason is there's not as much of a break angle. Just ignore those angles. It kind of goes a little more gently, so it doesn't seem to have as much of the same problems as the Gibsons. Played jazz on it for a number of years. Yeah, beautiful guitar. Love this guitar. There's a story behind it too. I went down to a guitar shop. It was American Music in Fresno, California. It's one of the only shops in California where you could get a guitar, or not in California, in Fresno, which is where I lived at the time, where you could get a decent instrument. It's also where I bought my clarinet. It was one of the only stores where you could get any brand that was good in the city of Fresno. No one stocked Fender guitars. No one stocked Gibson guitars. No one stocked Guild. No one stocked Marshall amps except for this one shop in Fresno. Everything else was wholesaler brands, Samick brands, like garbage for the most part. You couldn't get a good amp, right? You'd have to drive to San Francisco to get a good amp back in the 90s. And Fresno Fresno and Clovis together had like 1 million people in it. Even Clovis Music, which was like a big store, barely carried anything that was good. They carried good band instruments, but that was basically it, and not even really good ones. So I went down there to look for like an amp and for a better guitar. I wanted an electric guitar, right? And I found this guitar. I was like, this guitar is awesome, you know? And it was like an $1,800 guitar, which is like unfathomably high amount of money for me. And I went down and I played it a bunch of times, and the guy that worked there, he's actually the vocalist for the Mofo Party Band. Fun, really nice guy. And I talked him down to like a lower price. And I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to get this money. So I'm gonna work real quick. I got this job that I'm starting in June. I'm gonna start it up. I'm gonna go down there and buy it. My grandpa sends me a check for my 18th birthday. And it was $1,000 check. I'm like, I'm gonna get that guitar. I go down there. The guitar is gone. It's gone. Didn't get the guitar. I've had this happen several times where I tried to buy a guitar and it was like, no, already sold it. All right, that's fine. I'll go home and I'll think about what other guitar I want to get. And my dad had bought the guitar for me. So he had went down and now I ended up paying him $500 for the guitar because I felt like it was just too expensive for me to not buy into it and not have skin in the game for the guitar. So I did pay him some money for the guitar, but it was $500, not whatever the asking price was on it. So yeah, that's the story of this guitar. I added these knobs on in 2001. They feel like crap now. I'm going to put the originals. I lost the originals. My mom threw them away. But I found a way to get some replacements. So I'm going to put the originals back on it and maybe put it all back to factory settings. These were kind of cool. They always looked cool, but they actually are not very fun to use because you can't roll them that easy. They're just you can grab them, but rolling them with your pinky like I usually do on a Fender, it's awful feeling. Anyway, there's this guitar, But now you can get a Guild. You can get the Kim Thale Signature Guild, which honestly I would buy. It's really good. And you notice that they never got sued because this isn't an SG. I mean, not an SG. This isn't a Les Paul. It's reminiscent of a Les Paul, but the horn is different. The body is bigger. It's actually much bigger than a Les Paul in terms of its dimensions. It's much more like a jazz guitar. It's more, and then their hollow body guitars, the Starfires, those are really good as well. And they make an SG. It kind of looks like an SG. It's the Kim Thale guitar. And I've always been a big fan of Kim Thale's playing. Is very creative. Wokeness feeds into ESG incentives, which also relates to financial incentives, and many of these people are also left-wing now, a little bit of a white pill, guys. I saw lefties complaining on Twitter about how anti-wokeness is cost companies like $11 billion in stock price. I'm like, let's take it to 50 billion, So people's choices are having an effect. And that's despite my lack of belief in people boycotting. Maybe it's this. I don't have faith in baby boomers boycotting because baby boomers are bad at that. However, maybe the younger generations are a lot better at it, and I think the online environment helps us to boycott things a lot easier, especially if we're not boycotting Amazon, right? Like avoiding Target is as easy as going down to Walmart. It's actually not that hard, but like avoiding Amazon for book sales is very difficult for me, and for a lot of other consumers. Uh, it's my understanding that this Siegel family had some court victories with DC, and this was a way around it. Perhaps I'm wrong. It's possible. It's very hairy with a lot of that stuff because there's so many people involved, and you may have done work at a time where the contracts were different. But nowadays, most people are doing work for hire with comics. That's why. I always thought Ditko's family was trying to get some concessions from Marvel a few years ago. Yeah, probably. I mean, he was always in conflict with them, trying to get, felt like he was underpaid or not getting what he was owed. And what constitutes work for hire? That's another question, right? Copyright stuff is super hairy in court. I wouldn't want to litigate it if I had an option. So I don't want to like tempt any beast to sue me over trademark or copyright infringement. So I just do what I can to avoid that whole morass. Uh, I agree they don't get anything. I'm saying this one method is used to try to get around paying them any royalties they may have to fight for. That's a good point. All right, I agree. All right, I point taken. Supposedly, Condé Nast is making the terrible new James Patterson, Doc Savage, and Shadow books, which passed the mantle in preparation for the original characters going public domain. So they're going to make some new characters that are called that. That's interesting. It'll be interesting. Is Angelico from Needle Ash named after the guitar? Um, I just liked the name Angelico, Angel, right? Um, I wasn't thinking about the guitar, but I just like the name Angel Messenger. Have you seen the preview for the Fallout series? I have not. I saw an AI generated promotional poster that was really funny. That they made an AI poster for Fallout, but they did whatever. Didn't affect anything. It's not going to change anything. So we need a promotional thing. Maybe a poster of Fallout from the 50s. Someone typed up a good prompt, and then you look a little closer, you're like, those cars, like the steering wheels are in the wrong place, like everything's off a little bit, like the overall composition is good, but the details are not there. It's off topic. Do you happen to know any remedies for eye floaters? I don't. I've developed a distracting large one in my right eye and it makes reading annoying. I've heard that staying hydrated is the only thing that I've heard. It's like eventually your body will get rid of them. Um, and sometimes they're due to strains on the eye or dehydration, things like that. So I can't help you with that. My left eye is kind of weird. Like I have astigmatism in a way that it's almost like double vision. And I haven't had an eye doctor that's been able to adequately explain like why my left eye is so hard to focus on things. But it is. It's just weird, and no one really knows why my left eye just doesn't work as well as my right. Even with corrective lenses, I can't see super clearly out of it. I need to go to a specialist or something. But I mean, I can see out of the left eye. I don't really have floaters. It's just like focusing really close or even far away. Like focusing is it, like everything wants to focus just slightly off. Maybe because I'm really right eye dominant and I'm just really kind of aware of what my left eye is doing when I close my right eye. And maybe people aren't as aware. I had this with like chromatic aberration. I had some glasses made and I put them on. I'm like, oh, I can't deal with this. Everything has blue and orange things around it. And when it's like most people don't complain about this or notice it, I'm like, well, I notice it. I notice it big time, and I can't stand it. So I had my glasses, my reading glasses. I use them for the computer too. These are made of glass, right? These are not plastic. Glass does not have chromatic aberration, so there's no rainbow effects or anything like that. You can see that the prescription on my left eye is to have it look different. Like this one's a little bigger. This is like a +2 or something, and this one's like a plus what? I don't know. Like I could see better with them on. I have slight astigmatism, so it corrects that. But it's actually difficult for me to read. Like I can read Hardwick Benthow's thing. It's off topic, but do you happen to know any remedies for eye flares? It's difficult to read. Versus my right eye, I can see any detail no matter how small when I put on the glasses. Um, but at least I'm not nearsighted. This is another aside. Epidemic of nearsightedness. It's happening all over the world in first world countries where uh, an absolute majority of South Korean people are now nearsighted, and it's like 50% of Japanese people are nearsighted. It's like a really high percentage. What caused all this nearsightedness? The current idea is nearsightedness is actually caused by spending too much time inside. So you're spending like basically being a bookworm makes you need the glasses, makes you nearsighted because you're not exposing your eyes to different focal lengths and you're not making them work. The eyes grow elongated, so things are focusing in front of the retina, um, basically from being inside. And they found that people who spend a lot of time outside are nearsighted. So what's been the correction is like, well, kids obviously need to spend 3 hours outside, and like I don't know if my kids are meeting that. It's like, man, I need to get my kids outside a lot more than they are right now. They're only outside like 2 hours a day. We need to have like morning, noon, and afternoon recess, and go out at night, right? Like, you're made to be outside. So anyway, you're finding that like the old trope of like, oh, the bookworm wears glasses. The bookworm may be wearing glasses because he's a bookworm. In other words, him spending all his time inside makes him go nearsighted. And so that trope is true. Like the weenie guy wearing glasses is probably true because the people in the past who had to wear glasses because they were nearsighted were the weenies who weren't outside doing things. Weird to think about, right? Like reading makes you go blind. Do everything in moderation. Hardwick actually linked something on the Patreon Discord, which you can get by joining the Patreon, right? So on the Patreon Discord, he linked an article. It was a really good article. My only complaint was like, these super stimuli things are actually not a new phenomenon. We've been struggling with this since like the time of Noah, drunkenness and things like that cause health problems. But if you do anything to excess, it can cause a problem, including reading. If you're reading books all the time or sitting in front of a computer all the time and doing close work all the time, then it can make you go nearsighted, I guess. So you need to have a variety of things you do with your eyes. Whereas I'm very farsighted. I'm like, why am I farsighted? It might be because I spent all my time outside and no time doing close work for like years. I worked outside. I drove a truck. I was in marching band outside. I was outside like 8 hours a day for years. So maybe I got farsighted because I didn't spend enough time doing close work. I should have read more, maybe. I felt like I read plenty, but anyway, I didn't get nearsighted. Um, and most of the people I know who have vision, every person I've met, other than me, I don't think I've met a farsighted person besides me. I'm sure there out there are people who just get like lenses for close work. They're a little bit farsighted. My dad was farsighted, and then every person I met, like go to the optometrist, everybody's nearsighted. My cousin's wife is an optometrist. She's like, "Oh, your prescription has magnification on it." It's like that's actually rare. Like most people are just nearsighted, and you're doing negative. You're not doing positive. It's not a common thing at all. It's like, oh, okay, that's weird. But I think it's more just I was farsighted as early as my 20s, and I wore the same prescription for like 20 years, and I went back in. They're like, no, we need to do a little bit stronger prescription, and so I'm like, this prescription is really strong. It's so strong I actually can't walk with my glasses on. If I have my glasses on and start walking around, especially outside, if I go outside with my glasses on, I start feeling like I need to barf. It's just like the like visual distortions, all the curves, they make me feel awful. Hardwick says I'm nearsighted. I wasn't always, but years of spending most of my time reading and using a computer made me that way. Like it makes your eyes grow forward from the a constant trying to focus closer. I don't know what it is. I mean, I'm just kind of talking about butt there with that part, but currently the science literature says, hey, um, spending all your time inside will make you nearsighted. So kids need to spend more time outside. Hey, not a bad idea. There's lots of fun stuff to see outside, especially where I'm at. Take your kids out in the forest. I used to take my kids out in the field to find bugs, plants. So much learning that can happen outside. And where I'm at, we're just surrounded by life. It's awesome. I'm slightly farsighted. Don't know how I got that way when I'm inside a lot. I think farsighted is just more rare. Farsighted just means your eye is shorter, right? The focal length is slightly short. Um, so my left eye could have been because I got hit really hard in that. I got hit really hard on the side of my head and got a concussion right on my eye. Playing soccer, I got kicked right in the head uh, when I was in high school. So maybe my eye is messed up from a head injury, and I just didn't really take stock of it until like a couple years later. I think the CRT monitor I had for years made it even worse. I don't know. I don't know how that stuff was going to affect our eyes. It's interesting to think about, though. It's definitely interesting to think about. I'm realizing it's 8 o'clock, so I probably need to peace out, even though I started a little bit later. Let me sum up with dialogue. Most stories are carried by dialogue. Your dialogue needs to be a best of. Your dialogue has to serve the purpose of the story. When you are tagging dialogue in prose, you don't have to use said as long as there's two speakers. You just alternate with a new line anytime the next person is speaking. And you can use actions to replace dialogue tags such as he said and she said that give a little bit of extra emphasis on what the character is thinking or feeling, such as squeezing and making a fist or looking at the horizon or rubbing his beard, things like that. When writing a movie, that stuff applies, but you would just skip the directions and you let the actors figure all that stuff out. You don't need to worry about tags. It's just write the dialogue. Same thing if you're writing a comic book script. Generally, for comic books, you want to have action and dialogue. You don't want to have a whole wall of dialogue. It just doesn't work out that good for readers. So you want to interrupt that with characters doing things. So the way a story is told is characters say things and characters do things, and that's most of the thing that carries the story. There's a thing called that I call expositional dialogue, which is where you do exposition by characters saying things. Often this is awkward because characters are saying things that the audience perceives they wouldn't normally say things that the other character already knows and wouldn't say again. But you do it for the benefit of the audience, and it's a way to give the audience extra information in a visual medium, such as a movie or a play, um, as far as figuring that stuff out. So, yes, dialogue has a purpose. Dialogue carries the story. There should be a purpose to any conversation between two people, either to reveal more of the character or to move the story forward, reveal some backstory, or set up the next set of actions that the characters are going to take. So that's my summation for dialogue. Maybe I'll cover this next week when I get my computer working again, and just list just show how I kind of write dialogue in my books and how some other writers have done it, and then that'll give you a good idea of what it's going to look like on a page. And maybe we'll do a movie script too. We'll do that. What does a movie script look like? What does a play look like? There's no set format for plays, but there is a very strict format for screenplays. So if you're ever writing a screenplay, you gotta use the format, and the easiest tool for that, just so you know, is Final Draft. That's the industry standard program. It's not that expensive, but Final Draft is what most writers end up using. So if you haven't mentioned it, could you talk a bit about good and bad dialogue tags and when they're necessary? So yeah, I talked about that earlier in the stream. So yeah, um, mostly that's what you want to think about. You want to avoid having ums and ahs unless they are showing something to the reader that you want. You want to avoid adverbs unless they are changing the perception of the way the dialogue is being delivered. Most dialogue, we know how it's being delivered based on the content of the dialogue. It's a mistake to think that you have to write the way people talk all the time, but how they say things is pretty important. You want to get across what they're saying that's relevant to the story and have them say it in the way the character would say it. And that's what's going to provide a lot of characterization. It's really easy to have a lot of dead space with dialogue where characters just banter and it's not necessary. You want to stick the banter in between other things that are important. The banter gives a lot of characterization, but you don't want to have a scene that's just banter because you need every scene to be contributing to the forward momentum of the plot somehow. Otherwise, you know, it either needs to be filling out the past or projecting to the future or deciding things in the present, not really just having characters be themselves. That ends up being boring, believe it or not. Even if the characters are really interesting, you want to do that while they're doing something else. I kind of want you to watch Let's Play of the Forspoken game and examine the terrible dialogue. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we can do that. We'll see what kind of time we have. But anyway, that's it for today, folks. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is a fun thing. If you say subscribe on your videos, YouTube will now like make the subscribe button flash with like their AI learning. Subscribe, and then like the subscribe button will flash for people on the web client. Pretty fun. Just something that's here and there. I'm going to see how I can figure out how to end this, and I will see you all next time. Maybe I'll press this X. Have a great one. Are you sure you want to stop streaming? Yes. Have a great one, folks.